After reviewing the film, how did several key performers for the Dolphins actually play in the team's Week 17 win against the Browns? We're exploring that here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami, and the NFL Draft lead for the 33rd team. Want to give a special shout out and thank you to our everydayers, because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Happy New Year's Eve to all of you. And we are diving into a number of key performers, but key performers for like different reasons. We got the offensive line on here because everybody's focus is obviously there, and the team did not have success running the ball, and exploring why that was. Linebacker Tyrell Dodson, I think, is a key performer and a key talent because you have a vacancy at linebacker too. And this is a player that you picked up off waiver claims. And how did that perform? And kind of similarly for Tyler Huntley, who there's a backup quarterback opportunity for this team. And I know I said it on the post-game show, but I think complacency is the worst thing that you could do in that regard. But how did Tyler Huntley actually play? How did they call the game? I thought it showed some growth, not just from Tyler, but from Mike McDaniel, which is a welcome development. So we're going to get into all that here today on the show, starting with the offensive line. So I have my grades for this game, and it was definitely a down performance for the offensive line. When you look at Teron Armstead graded with the worst grade that he had all season long in this contest before he left near the midway point of the I guess a little bit closer to the end of the first half. Kendall Lamb scored his worst game grade in a month. Aaron Brewer scored his worst game grade in a month. Liam Eichenberg scored his second worst game grade of the season behind only the Houston game. And he was in a platoon split with Isaiah Wynn, who did not score as well as he did last week against San Francisco in his season debut. Now, he was significantly better than Liam Eichenberg, but it was still a regression in his individual performances, or I guess performance from the week prior, because it was the only other performance you had to measure. Patrick Paul, I thought, did a couple of really nice things. People had a lot of attention on the pressure that was conceded on that left side with Myles Garrett. On more than one occasion with Patrick Paul in the game, the Dolphins are running a half slide protection where the center turns one way and they're turning the center to Myles Garrett. So you've got a defensive tackle and Myles Garrett, and the center's turning that way, and you're responsible for zoning that side of the protection. Then you man on the other side with Isaiah Wynn and Kendall Lamb. And two of the big pressure / sack opportunities that Myles Garrett had in those instances, he came through the B gap. And I know, like, he's lined up outside, so there's an association that comes with, well, he's the outside pass rusher and you're the tackle out there, and he beats you across your face. But if the center's stepping your way and you're zoning it, Pat has to protect the C gap. And I put more of those pressures and disruptions on Rob Jones than I do Patrick Paul, for the context of the protection that's called and the fact that the center's turning that way, and that's your zone side. And yeah, Myles Garrett gives you a jab step upfield, and then he cuts across Patrick Paul's face, and Rob Jones is late getting off the defensive tackle to help him protect the B gap, and Myles Garrett pinballs off of it and gets inside. I thought Pat did some really nice things in the run game. Pat was probably the most pleasant surprise versus the TV copy of knowing that Garrett got pressure. And yeah, Patrick Paul gets called for a holding penalty, and that's reflected in the grade that I gave him in this game. Now, Kendall Lamb and Aaron Brewer. Kendall Lamb had a great first half. It slowed down a little bit in the second half, but I thought Kendall Lamb played an outstanding game against Cleveland. Him and Brewer, and again, both of them scored their lowest grades in a month of individual performances for each one of them Those were the two highest graded offensive linemen on the team. And then I had Patrick Paul, then I had Isaiah Wynn, then I had Teron Armstead, Rob Jones, Lee Mike. That's how it shook out for me and my grades for the assessment of how this group played. But not a surprise when you consider also some significant regression in the tight end room, that there wasn't a lot of success running the ball. This is a team that has declared it wants to be a strong side outside zone rushing offense. And they hit him a couple times early in this game and had success. And then you had guys taking L's. You had Durham Smythe, I thought, played his worst game of the season from my performance assessment of his play. Julian Hill had a strong start, but similar to Kendall Lamb, as the game wore on, it kind of balanced itself out where there were wins and losses. And Alec Ingold was steady, but not necessarily like the impact knocking guys around type of performance that he had the previous week against San Francisco. And Jonnu Smith was relatively quiet, and a lot of that was because the Dolphins were running a lot of, 21 personnel with Ingold, Julian Hill, and a back on the field at the same time. And then they started getting into some of their two-back stuff in the second half. And so I'm not surprised looking at the grades. It was similar to the Houston game, with the exception of you didn't have like a second cataclysmically bad offensive tackle or offensive line performance. Like the Eichenberg and Jackson Carman were in that Houston game, two of the bottom three performers I had for the entire team as individual performances that I graded out for the season. You had one of those in Liam Eichenberg against Cleveland, but everybody else was relatively steady state, at least somewhat close to expectation, if not modestly above expectation for their individual performances. But when there's no standout performances, I think that's the thing when you look at the entire offensive performance. You had Tyler Huntley scored very well. Tyreek Hill scored very well. Jonnu Smith scored well. And that's kind of it as far as guys that had significantly above expectations. So when you call the game a certain kind of way, knowing you're calling around a pass rusher, Myles Garrett, now you got a rookie tackle out there that you want to give a little extra help to, and you have a backup quarterback who's playing in the game, all of those things influence what your play calling looks like. And it became a very kind of close to the vest type of feel for how they call the game. And when that happens and then people don't shine and perform above expectations, that's how you end up with the kind of offensive performance that we ultimately saw in this game for the Dolphins offensively, and scoring 20 points. Now, we're going to go to the other side of the ball and look at linebacker Tyrell Dotson, who's an important key talent for not just the stretch run, because it doesn't sound like we're going to see Anthony Walker this week, but also potentially looking forward as the Dolphins assess their needs. We're going to get into that next here on Locked On Dolphins. Stick with us. Has Rocket Money helped save you money on any subscriptions that you forgot that you were paying? It happens to all of us. Rocket Money makes it easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is the personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together into one singular place, whether it's subscriptions, spending habits, or the goals for the upcoming year. Rocket Money has more than 5 million users and has saved more than $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Tyrell Dodson started his career in Buffalo, signs in Seattle, is cut as they continue to churn, comes to Miami, has a pick in his first game against New England, plays a horrible game, if we're being completely frank, against Green Bay, missed a bunch of tackles, really struggled in that environment, and we hadn't really seen him since, until he had to start against Cleveland and played 79 snaps. And he played a nice game. I think that's first and foremost. When you compare and contrast Anthony Walker and Tyrel Dodson, I think Tyrel Dotson's lack of experience as an NFL player is prominent when you watch him play at times from a processing and instincts and the play diagnosis perspective. And that's to be expected with a guy that before 2023 had played less than 400 snaps as an NFL defender in his first 3 seasons in the NFL. This is really his second year of playing defense at any significant rate. But he moves well. He hits hard when he hits, and he moves well. And he was seeing things very well against Cleveland. Now, whether or not that would be replicated against the Jets this upcoming week is going to be a different story. But this is a player that I think is a really important one for a lot of people have big picture ideas about what direction the team needs to go this offseason, and players that's on the roster that are under contract for the future that we don't want to be under contract for the future anymore for salary cap savings and transitions and reloading and a new direction and this, that, the other thing. But if you're looking at everything and you're looking at the expiring contracts and players that aren't coming back, and then you acknowledge you're going to move on from some other talent, at some point, it'd be nice to have some guys that you have some proof of concept with internally and on your team that you feel like can be a part of the solution and have a role on your team moving forward. And Tyrell Dotson is a player who has that opportunity where if you told me that Miami re-signed Tyrell Dodson to a new contract, I'd be pretty stoked. Now, if you told me it was for starting money and he was going to get David Long's 2 for $12 and he was going to be the other starter, no questions asked, I'd take some exceptions to that. But is this the kind of player that you can sign to a contract extension to have the opportunity to have him in and maybe draft a guy or pick somebody else up in free agency? I mean, it was a 1-year, $4.2 million contract was what he signed in Seattle. And of course, the Seahawks paid out a $1 million signing bonus. He played 2/3 of the season with Seattle. He had some playtime incentives that looks like, he's obviously not going to hit for paying out from Miami's perspective. And I'm not sure how that works with splitting across 2 teams if Seattle would be on the hook for it. But it'd be nice to have a contender for a spot. And it's kind of what they tried to do with Isaiah Wynn last year, but Isaiah Wynn got hurt. So you bring him back, but you don't know when he's going to be available. So he's not really ready to compete for a job as a potential starter and have competition. And that's what I want to see from this team this offseason is one of the big points of emphasis for me is I want there to be highly competitive battles for starting jobs up and down the roster, right? And you had some of that for the interior offensive line spots, but Isaiah Wynn wasn't ready to go. I mean, you knew you signed Aaron Brewer to be the center. You had 2 well-established starting tackles. Your wide receiver pecking order was very well established. You had a QB2 competition, but with guys that you frankly got complacent with and didn't really churn that roster or try to in a finite resources league. You took the low-hanging fruit and said, well, we've had these guys here. Let's bring them both back, and we'll let them fight it out again. You bring in Jordan Poyer and Javon Holland as well-established starters. You sign Kendall Fuller to be the other starter at the other corner spot. Jordan Brooks signs a contract that warrants that he's going to be a starter. Like, how many spots did you really have competition for? Interior defensive line? The edge 3 spot after Shaq Barrett retires before he changed his mind? That for me is one of the key prerogatives and priorities that I would love to see this team embrace is you want to have a more competitive camp. You want to have more hungry guys competing for playing time and starting spots in camp and early in the season, and hopefully beginning that youth movement and transition. And look, nobody's going to push Jalen Ramsey for a starting spot. And it should be that way. But Jalen Ramsey's play speaks for itself, and it's graded out that way when you look at how he's graded this season. The same's to be said for Zach Sealer. Nobody's going to push Zach Sealer for a starting spot. But you really have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, but he's played in 3.5 games, 11, 12. I would say you have 12 high achievers on this roster from like an above expectation for the entire body of the work for the season. One of them's Calais Campbell, who's 38. One of them's Teron Armstead, who continues to fight like hell to finish the season the way that he wants to, and I hope he has the opportunity to do. And if a guy like Teron wants to come back next year, I'd love to find a way to make that work for everybody involved. And they played ball with that last year and having fluidity with his contract. But other than that, I mean, that's the good news is 12 high overachievers it's a little more than 20% of your roster when it's all said and done. But the rest of these spots, like, yeah, I want to ramp up the competition. I want young, hungry guys in here. And I think that's a pristine opportunity for this team in the midst of what their culture looks like. And Tyrell Dotson physically can be a part of the solution of players who play with a certain demeanor. But I wouldn't want to hand him a starting spot. But if he gets the opportunity to play against the Jets and he plays similarly to the way that he played against the Browns, he was fast, he was decisive, good tackling effort. He had one missed tackle on like 15 attempts. He obviously has the interception. That would be, I think, a great development for the linebacker spot. If it's Jordan Brooks, if it's Tyrel Dodson to compete for a starting job, I'm not counting on anything from Channing Tindall. I kind of wish that experience would be over with at this point. Duke Riley, the special teams guy, I'd probably make a change there. David Long, they already cut. Anthony Walker, love the way he plays. And if he was back as linebacker 4, I'd feel pretty good about it. But I would want a young, hungry guy in the room to compete with Tyrell Dodson. Whether that's a guy that's just getting done a rookie contract, who you think is maybe a good fit, like what Jordan Brooks was, although probably not to that financial investment with the second player, although it's money well spent with Jordan Brooks, who's one of my favorite players on the team, or draft pick. And finding as many different ways to kind of get that dynamic in your rooms is one of my preferred courses forward for what this football team needs to look like culturally and competitiveness for playing time next year to be the best version of themselves. But flowers to Tyrell Dotson for his play because it wasn't just hollow numbers. Now, let's keep our helmet on. And we can laugh about it because you won the game by 17 points. But I wanted to give some flowers to Tyrell Dotson for his performance and just kind of talk about why he's an important player for like how that can be. They can parlay this sample size of Jordan or Tyrell Dotson playing in Miami, which is close to 200 snaps defensively at this point, and he's going to get another start and probably finish with about 250 snaps. Play well, because I'd love to have you back and love to have you competing for a starting spot on this team next year. But you got to earn it. And that's, I think, the big thing for Miami, that I want more guys in the starting lineup next year that had to earn it through camp and performance. And they'll tell you that's what happened last year, but the pecking order for this group was pretty well established in most spots. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the spot that was most intense with, which was the interior defensive line, you got Zach Sealer, who's a star. And star is not, for my money, an over-exaggeration. You got Calais Campbell. But you got two guys with over 400 snaps this year in Benito Jones and Deshaun Hand that came out of that battle royale. And their performance numbers are modest, but they look like they are viable rotation pieces. And part of that is because of how they had to earn the right to get on the field in a battle royale for playing time. I think, anyway. How about Tyler Huntley? How about the scheme? We're going to get into that next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. Stick with us. Obviously, a much more assuring performance for Tyler Huntley than what he put on display when he played in Tennessee and New England and Indianapolis. And I think that's a sobering reminder. And first of all, it's really damning for Skylar Thompson. But it's a sobering reminder of the value of time on task, in that he looked like a different player than what he did even in the Indy game. And if that was a player that this team had interest in cut downs, and he's available and gets cut and you don't claim him, and you obviously had eyes on him, and then he's the guy that you pick up and bring in when Tua goes down after week 2, that's a missed opportunity. Because I do think a more comfortable Tyler probably wins you the Colts game. Now, he got hurt in that game as well, and he had a couple flying a little too close to the sun for my comfort elements with his play outside the pocket as well against Cleveland. But this was not just a respectable, like above expectation grade. This was a good game grade for Tyler Huntley. Like, he scored the most comparable game grade that I had for quarterback play this season was Tua Tagovailoa in the Raiders game, was the closest above expectation performance. And it's the only quarterback performance of any meaningful sample size of snaps that I have this season in which the backup quarterback played above expectation. So that development in itself, you're excited about. But part of it feels like, is because of how you call the game from a passing game perspective. You saw them lean into that infamous Watson RPO that the Dolphins run with the glance, the wheel, and the flat, and the Dolphins ran that a couple of times, and it was actually the play that Tyler Huntley scored his touchdown on, running the ball. Was they did it to his right, and neither of the two options on the initial kind of perimeter read were available. And they kind of picked up Julian Hill as the slide player getting out into the flat. So Tyler gets outside the first arriving pass rusher, and then Julian kind of positions his body to pick off the players that are in pursuit from behind. And then the receivers do a nice job downfield in the end zone of plastering and letting Tyler get into the end zone. So it's cool to see him score a rushing touchdown on that play, because that is an element of RPOs that this offense does not really have, right? And that's okay. It's Tua makes judicious decisions and quick decisions, and his anticipation and how he throws the ball in some of those instances will many quarterbacks will see the same picture and not find a completion, where Tua will. And that kind of goes back to what Kurt Warner and I talked about in the summertime. And I know a lot of people are mad about the Tua situation, and I'm frustrated with the Tua situation too. But I would just ask this, as far as the Tua situation independently and not playing. Did Tua playing against Cleveland, like, really tell you anything you didn't know? Like, it's the same thing. I go back to the Houston game, right? Like, did you really learn anything new with the news that Tua has this hip injury that they're being ambiguous with? And I think that probably doesn't help the case of everybody trying to work through their emotions about the injury, and in that they're not being particularly clear on what it is. So everybody's imaginations start to run wild about what it is and what the problem is, and this, that, the other. Or did you really know, like, no matter what this offseason, you were going to have to invest in the backup quarterback spot, because you were probably going to get to a point in a season, in any given season, where Tua is going to miss a handful of games. I think everybody knew that. It's super irritating that it's happening in week 17 and week 18, potentially week 18, I should say. Mike McDaniel said it was the gray area of gray areas, because it depends on time and how his body responds. I'd like to think he will play against the Jets, but If he doesn't, I at least feel better knowing that Tyler Huntley is not just we're going to keep our nose above the waterline so we don't drown out there type of performance. And credit, I will give credit to Tyler and I will give credit to Mike, where they ran more of these play action deep hooks. And they ran less of like the wrap in breakers in the middle of the field and ran more isolation routes on the boundaries, what it felt like. And those were the plays in which Tyler was really confident in how he ripped the ball. And it was nice to see that. And it was nice to see that tweak, because I go back to the Tennessee game and the phrasing I remember being discussed was, including by me, was like coaching malpractice for how you tried to run the offense and run Tua's offense with not Tua and Tyler Huntley out there being here 2 weeks. It was really frustrating. But I think you can tell that Tyler's poured into this offense and the team has poured into Tyler. And that's a nice development. Now, again, this is by no means an advocation for sign Tyler Huntley as the QB2, no questions asked this offseason, because I just got done doing the same song and dance with Tyrell Dotson in segment 2. I want guys that earn it, and I want a lot of competition. And I understand there's finite resources, so there's going to be certain spots where maybe you're not going to get rid of a guy that you would ideally like to from a financial perspective because you don't want to open up more holes on your roster. And there's only so many opportunities to bring young guys in that you feel are viable starters or contenders to start. But you can't skimp on this one. And Tyler, if he's back next year, and I would assume that he will be based off of this performance, and if he does play against the Jets, if it's anywhere near this, he'll have earned the right to be back. He's going to have a head start in that competition because he was here effectively the whole year, with the exception of the first couple weeks of the season. But I like seeing that self-awareness, both from Tyler and Mike McDaniel, I thought. And the fact that he had that kind of performance while also playing with one wide receiver that graded above expectation, one of the more modest offensive line performances, is honestly probably more in line with the Green Bay or the Las Vegas games. Although even in Green Bay and Las Vegas, Teron Armstead scored very well. But the rest of the group was kind of floating around just marginally below or just marginally above expectation. That's kind of what the Cleveland grades look like, but there was no high scorer here, because everybody was modest across the board and Lean was really bad. And to have that, and to still have that kind of performance, I think is a big feather in the cap of Tyler Huntley. But it was nice to go on and turn on the film and see. And it's like, yeah, they didn't run the offense the same way that they would with Tua. And the timing of some of the passing concepts wasn't the same as what it was with Tua. But that should be the expectation when those are what you consider to be the significant strengths of your starter. And they're what makes him a unique player and very challenging to defend when he's on the field. And we hope we see him on the field against the Jets. We're going to start to turn the page towards the Jets starting tomorrow. We have crossover Thursday with John Butchko of Locked On Jets on Thursday. And this might be it for the in-season content this year. We're going to enjoy it this week. Hope you guys enjoyed this show. Kyle Krabs, you can keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Make it a great rest of your day. I am out of here. Go Fins.